and I'll hand over to Martin, who'll give us a brief introduction, and then we can start asking people to talk about their wine. Over to you, Martin.
Let us start with Malbec. I mean, I think this is a tasting, and I hope that those who have got a bottle will give us their views on it. I think Malbec is actually a very interesting variety. As many people will know, it's an allowed variety in Bordeaux, and that's really where it perhaps made its name. But of course, it's fallen heavily out of favor. The reason really being is that it was overtaken actually by Merlot. They share many of the same characteristics actually, but including propensity to disease and all that sort of thing. But Merlot has more warmth and charm, and Malbec is seen to be somewhat rustic. But what the exciting thing about Malbec is it's found a new life, if you like, in the other side of the world, principally in Argentina. It's grown actually all over the world now these days, where it seems to do extremely well. So I would say in some respects, just as Carmenere is a signature variety of Chile, Malbec is very much, I would say, the signature red variety, that is, of Argentina. And it seems to do rather well there. I mean, the one that I have, and I made some notes, although I haven't got it open today, I thought it had lovely, I've got a Finca Las Moras Barrel Select, which means it's sort of oak aged. And it comes from San Juan, which is just north of Mendoza and south of La Rioja in northwestern, get my geography, northwestern Argentina. But you would expect in a Malbec, certainly from the New World like Argentina, to be quite firm, the tannins to be quite firm, the acidity to be quite full, but not over excessive, and it will have a sort of structure about it, but a softer structure than it would have had if it were grown in the more traditional areas like Bordeaux. The other area where Malbec has been really well known actually is in Cahors, which is a southwestern wine growing area in France. And many, particularly the older generation here, perhaps we're all older generation, no we're not, but anyway, will remember the term the black wine of Cahors, which was in fact Malbec, but that's when it was grown on the higher slopes on limestone soil. And that seems to give it an enormous structure and enormous weight, which I think was very, very, made it very special and unique. Moving on then to Tempranillo very quickly, which is a very, very different variety actually. And everybody I think will associate Tempranillo with Spain, particularly actually in Rioja. And remember that Rioja was sort of founded in the mid-19th century by growers from Bordeaux who fled phylloxera. They moved south into La Rioja, where phylloxera didn't exist. And it does exist now, but not at all. Many vineyards there are not grafted. Anyway, Tempranillo is a lovely, easy, rounded, soft variety. It's almost always oak aged, or frequently oak aged, which gives it a nice sort of vanilla flavor about it. Curious enough, it's not actually very widely grown anywhere else. It's gaining traction in Australia. It ripens quite early and has a short ripening period. So that's quite an advantage in a hot country like Spain, a hot area like Spain, because you don't get, it ripens fairly quickly before it gets too much sugar and therefore too much alcohol. The one I have is Val Serrano Crianza. You can see the label. It comes from Bodegas della Marquesa,
Celesti Crianza,
who are in the Alavesa region. I've been dealing with them, well now I deal with them through Davies, or Davies deal with them, but since about 1974, I suppose. It's a very long established relationship that I personally have with them. It's a fantastic estate, actually. It's modelled on a French chateau. Everything is oak aged in small oak. Everything is farmed on their own premises rather than buying in grapes from elsewhere and so on. But I can't go on for too much longer, otherwise really nobody else will have a chance. This particular one is 2015 vintage. I tasted it earlier this evening. It's got lovely, spicy dark cherry and plum fruit flavors. I love all the component parts, the acidity, the tannins, and so on, which are were complete in themselves, but knit well together, and that's crucial. So you've got a harmony about it, which is very, very attractive. It's rounded, soft, easy. It's the sort of wine that would be enjoyed by somebody who didn't like red wines or was new to wine. Like Beaujolais, actually. Beaujolais is a Gamay, rather, is similar. They're wines for everybody, and you can take them at any level you like. So that's the kick-off, and I hope everybody else will now tell us about what they have got for these two lovely varieties.
Martin, it's Tricia Lawman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the difference between the height and because you often see Alto and things like that on a bottle of Rioja? What does that do? I know it's the height of where they are, but can you elaborate on that?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. Rioja Alta, actually, Rioja lies on the river Ebro. As you first get further east up the Ebro, you get the Rioja Alta, the Rioja Alavesa, and so on. And those are the finest parts. It is slightly more elevated. The soil is actually very much the same, but you get a slightly less hot climate, and therefore the grapes have more acidity and more structure. Very interestingly, though, if you look at the bottle of particularly Argentinian wines, it'll almost always give you the altitude at which the grapes are grown. That has an enormous bearing, because as you go higher, it gets cooler, and admittedly the days get shorter. But in that very, very hot area like Mendoza, for example, you need to be quite high to make wines with structure. The further lower down you get, the broader the plains become, and the higher yield. The wines are very nice, but they don't have the structure. So it's quite a matter of pride to state the actual altitude where your grapes have come from.
And which is the best area of to buy Rioja from?
Well, I mean, there's advantages of all. I think the Alavesa is one of the very best. That's just sort of around Haro, which is one of the main. As you get further down the river, the wines tend to become a little freer, if you know what I mean, and a little less structure. But most Rioja estates are now quite big, and they're buying grapes from elsewhere. That's fine. That's why there are bodegas, if you like. There are not that many single estates like Bel Serrano, which farm all their own fruit and base themselves on a French chateau. So in a sense, a Rioja producer, Bilbaenos, for example, or I can't think, Cune for another, which is a cooperative, they can make pretty well whatever wine they want, depending on where they source their fruit.
Thank you.
If you had a choice, Martin, at a dinner party, irrespective of the food, Tempranillo or Malbec, which would you be drinking?
Well, I think I'd probably go for Tempranillo for this very good reason. Tempranillo is very much on its own. You know, Malbec is quite similar in some respects to Merlot, as I was explaining earlier. Merlot sort of took over from it, if you like. And I think that what worries me a little bit sometimes, certainly at the volume end of the trade, is that one wine begins to taste very much like another. And Tempranillo offers a distinct point of difference. And therefore, I think it has something to contribute to the gamut of tastes and flavors that we have available. That doesn't mean to say that Malbec hasn't been hugely successful in the New World, in Argentina and to some lesser extent in Chile, producing wines which are low, not expensive, and they're easy on the palate, and they fulfill a mass market.
Thank you.
I'd love to know what everybody else has got. I mean, I've shouted about mine.
No, but Martin, just staying with Rioja and Tempranillo, I mean, Rioja surely is normally a combination of grapes. Okay, Tempranillo may be the majority of it, but it doesn't stand alone, does it, with Rioja? And it seems to me that Rioja is sort of synonymous with oak, and you know, depending on the type of oak, and you know, it's almost sort of becomes more important than the grape. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but there seems to be an element of that.
I have the balance.
I understand completely. You're absolutely right. I mean, actually, most Rioja of any real quality would be about 80% Tempranillo. Then you'd have 10% Mazuelo or Garnacho or whatever it might be. But it's usually at least 80%. There will be others, I'm sure, particularly in the lower Appellation, not in the Alta or the Alavesa, where you're right. But you wouldn't get less in any Rioja. I've forgotten the exact proportion you need to qualify for the Appellation. But you'd need a good 60 to 70% of Tempranillo to call it Rioja, actually. And what was the other question? Sorry.
What about the oak?
Oh, the oak. Yes, it's synonymous with oak, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are wines called Joven, Joven, which don't need any oak aging. But when you get to Criantha, it has to be 1 year in oak. Reserva, I think, is 1 year in oak, but probably longer. Grand Reserva is 2 or 3. Sort of thing that masters of wine learn once and then promptly forget, I'm ashamed to say. You're right, oaking is very important. And I think actually it is the oaky vanilla structure that actually makes Tempranillo what it is. I think Tempranillo on its own, without any structure, can be a little bit bland, if you know what I mean.
American or French oak?
Ah, now then, that's a question. Well, at one time, anybody would have sniffed at anything that wasn't French oak, but of course now American oak is widely used. That's a very, very interesting question. I mean, oak does make a difference, and I have been some time ago now to tastings both in California and parts of France, where they've given you an oak tasting, and you tasted 20 different wines in different, not 20 different forms of oak, but there are all sorts of different oaks in France, let alone in other parts of the world. But of course, the demand for oak is absolutely huge now. And so you have to find oak from, sometimes I'm told, even chestnut, which I think was an appalling prospect. And oak's very expensive. An American oak is considerably cheaper than the Allier, for example, which you might get near Bordeaux.
I was intrigued, picking up Trisha's question there, to see that my Malbec, which is Argentinian, Cristobal, I don't know whether you know the maker, Martin, but it's been for at least 2 years, and so it implies, in French oak. Of course, being quite close to United States, presumably these would be second-hand French oak barrels.
I would think almost certainly. If it weren't, it would probably say so. New oak's jolly expensive. And of course, oak, just in oak, you could get big oak barrels, that is in oak, or you could be small 225-litre barrels, which is what you'd get a hogshead, if you like. But oak aging is an essential part of winemaking, actually, in many different aspects.
Well, I take the point about Malbec being slightly rougher or coarser or
Rustic.
rustic. There's a good term for it. And yet it is a very pleasant wine. 2014, my particular one. Would you have suggested that is too old, too young for Malbec in coming from Argentina?
Well, Mr. Master, I can't honestly comment. I don't know the vintages so well in Argentina. Of course, they have a bearing on it, but they aren't quite as important as they would be in France, where you're right. Margin. No, I think you could judge that more by how old it is rather than the individual vintage concerned. No, I think Malbec 2014 would be delicious, I should have thought.
Yeah, it's very drinkable. Will it go with my curry that I'm having later?
No, Richard, it wouldn't.
No, that's what I feared.
It probably would, actually. I'm not a great one for wine and food, actually. I like wine and wine. I just find that I get very confused. If I want a glass of wine, I'll have it. And I suppose I should be more delicate about it. And of course, wine does match food very well, but I'm not really good at that, I'm afraid. Others around the table, Robin Arculus for one, and many others I know would have a great point of view on that.
I like wine with food, actually, but wines seem to differ. Some are very good with food and others are very good on their own. For example, if we're talking about white wine, I'm a great lover of Sauvignon Blanc, but that I see as an aperitif wine as opposed to a food wine.
Well, I like wine with food too, actually. I mean, I think wine and food are indivisible. They're made to go together. But actually, one of the reasons why New World wines took off hugely was because they didn't need food. And very often, a French wine, let us say as an example, has quite a decent amount of acidity. And therefore, if you drink them on their own, they can taste a bit sharp, be they red or white. When you taste them with food, of course, you lose that into the food and the wine comes into its own. By contrast, if you have a soft, easy wine from the New World, that's lovely on its own, but you taste it with food and the flavor gets lost into the food, so it tastes rather bland, if I make myself clear. It's quite a good point, that, actually.
Interesting. That's a good point.
And that's why a younger generation, who are now the old generation, took to Australian wines in a big way back in the early to mid 1980s, actually.
I was told some years ago, which I've always bore in mind, was that when you're putting wine with food, it's a bit like a compliment where you automatically think of roast pork and say apple sauce, or roast lamb and mint sauce, or rosemary. And so if you start looking at the way foods are actually complemented with herbs and other things to take away the richness, then the complement of wine with food is actually the same matching. So therefore, if you've got something like roast pork, it's so rich, you need something like a Sauvignon Blanc or something with a high acidity to take that richness away. And I've always had that in mind when I'm thinking about drinking wine with specific foods.
That's a very good point there. I'm sure that's absolutely right. But you see, without the food, without the richness, without this symbiosis, is that the right term? Linking up together, then either one would be the poorer.
Absolutely.
Ray, can I ask what you're drinking?
Yes, and I want to come in and just say a word or two by way of defense for the poor Malbec, because over the years, I've always really enjoyed our holidays in Cahors, not least because, not the less, because compared to Saint-Emilion, where we've drunk the Merlot or the Merlot Cabernet Sauvignon mixes, the wines in the Cahors are so cheap and they're actually so good. But I'm drinking, well, we're drinking both. we're not one of these wimps that can only manage half a bottle or something. We're going for the 2 bottles, a bottle of Malbec, a bottle of Tempranillo, and we've got a bottle of Vaquera to finish up in the kitchen that's left over from earlier in the week. So we're going to have to go at it tonight. But I'm drinking, or we're drinking, a very young compared to Richard's Malbec, a 2020 Malbec, one from this spring. So it's a really young Malbec from Mendoza in Argentina, and it is absolutely wonderful. We've got a little bit of cheese and 1 or 2 breadsticks, as you've seen us munching away, and it's rich. It's 14.5 degrees. It's lots of fruit, and it's, you know, a really super wine. And you know, when you go into France and in the supermarkets, you see a cow at a couple of euros a bottle. You know, for God's sake, buy it, because it's a really good wine.
Well, I love to hear that. I mean, I wasn't in any way diminishing the wines of Cahors. When I
Oh no!
Back wine of Cahors, I said it hopefully with tones of awe and respect, because they are lovely wines. But they are very different, I think, from those in Saint-Emilion. I mean, Saint-Emilion almost invariably, I mean, much Malbec than now anyway. But what we did, it was almost always blended with Cabernet, or Cabernet Franc, actually, in that area. So I think the lovely thing about wine, there's room for everything, every nuance, every subtlety, every mood, and, as Paul would say, every sort of food, really.
No, I wasn't criticising your comments, Martin, because I wouldn't dare do that. But I looked in my Larousse, a French Larousse des Vins, and it described the wines from the Cahors as not just rustic, but as animal.
Yes, I've heard that sort of. It's a wonderful term, isn't it? It conjures up all sorts of images, some of which you didn't want to think about it. Sort of farmyard manure, stables, and
it's just unbelievable.
Which bit
some 49.5 years ago, Jane and I honeymooned in Cahors. So know it well, but I was going to ask Martin whether or not the method of production of Malbec has changed somewhat since then, because if I had bought a bottle at €2, I don't think 50 years ago it would have been very drinkable, because it was terribly rough at that point. And I could understand what animal description. But the more expensive wines were fine, very good, not just fine.
Master, I don't think it would have been euros somehow.
Well, don't be so picky, Lee, honestly. All right, 2 old francs.
To be honest, I mean, of course, I mean, I have to say, I've never bought much Cahors. It was never part of what I did. I've been there, but that's about it, really. I would think inevitably, of course, winemaking will have changed and developed and improved in Cahors like everywhere else. And there is a market nowadays that wants wines that are instantly drinkable. They don't really want to wait for them. They want wines at a good unit price, which are rounded and supple and easy to drink straight away, which is, again, why Malbec in Cahors, in Argentina has done so well, because that's the style that they produce. So I'm sure Cahors will have done their bit to have produced a lot of that sort of wine at the sort of €3 or €4 bottle of price or whatever. So the winemaking, you know, you have to sell the stuff after all.
And that is presumably why Bordeaux has started making rosé, so they can sell it immediately.
Well, I think rosé is quite tricky. I mean, I don't think it is a little better now, but one time, and I think to some extent still true, you can sell rosé for about 3 months of the year. And if you haven't sold it, never mind where it comes from, you know, is a bit of a dead duck. So it's quite, I mean, that's changing a bit, but I think what I think is exciting about Bordeaux, which, to digress, is the quality of white wine is getting better and better. If they want to make white wine of high quality, and I'm appalled. I'm not commercially involved in the trade anymore. I'm appalled at the high price of a half decent white Burgundy. And it seems to me that Bordeaux can come in and fill that slot quite comfortably at a considerably cheaper price. I mean, 16 vintages, they made my house, and I was still in the trade there, they made my hair stand on end. Anyway, we digress. What has everybody else bought in terms of all from the New World, or did anybody buy a French Malbec?
Well, I've bought the Trevento Argentinian Malbec from Tesco's. I fell in love with the Malbec grape some years ago, in as much that I don't have a Catholic palate in terms of wine. I like to adventure and see what different countries are doing. And this is one of the reasons why I like following grape varietals, because I can then match them with varietals from specific countries just to see what's doing. And the one I've got is a reserve, Malbec 2019. The 2018 vintage won the IWSC Silver and the Drinks Business Silver. It has actually surprised me. It is not, it's quite a big wine with a good nose, and it's very, very rounded, not too much tannin with it, and is extremely drinkable, and would match probably a nice beef bourguignon or a nice roast beef or something that's fairly sort of wintry. I understand that it's actually matured in French oak, and does very well. And it comes, as I say, it was £8 a bottle from Tesco's, and that's on their normal costings, not with any of their discounts.
I buy it too, and it's an excellent product, isn't it?
It's very, very drinkable. I mean, I have wines which I sort of categorize as specials, and then I have what I call everyday drinking, and they vary depending on quantity availability. The more special ones I keep for sort of specific dinner parties. And this one I could drink.
Clark, I can't quite believe it, but there we are. Great minds. I thought I'd go for somewhere different this time, and we bought exactly the same wine. Well, I totally concur.
What vintage have you got, Lee?
It's 2019.
Oh, my label's different to yours.
Ah, no, this is the private reserve.
Ah, right.
Okay. There we are.
Well,
mine is made in privacy.
Immediate past masters are entitled to private reserves.
Well, it's probably the only thing I can get these days.
So that one would be £8 temperance.
Actually, strangely, it's on offer at the moment. It claims to be more than £10 normally, but it's actually also on at £8. But it's a really complex wine. I think it's great.
And it's lovely. Where did you get it from?
Tesco's, would you
believe? You got it at Tesco's too?
Yeah, it's literally next door to the one that you had, bizarrely.
Oh,
but,
wow.
Anyway, great minds. It's a super wine.
It's very, very drinkable, I think.
No, that was reduced from £10.
Barbara, we haven't heard what wine you're drinking.
Oh, I was going to ask that. Luigi Bosco, isn't it?
Yes. I was going to ask Martin, are they usually in a different bottle to other red wines? Because this one is much taller than other bottles.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And heavier.
Yes.
Well, I loved it when you told me you were going to have Luigi Bosco. I was probably the first person ever not to ship it, but to sell it in the UK. I bought it for an odd chap who was sort of broker for them at one time. It's a very long established winery. It was in Argentinian terms of impeccable. As for the bottle shape, I'm honestly not sure. I think probably it looks like, for me, I haven't seen a bottle of Luigi Bosco for ages, as it happens, but it looks to me quite a big, sort of heavy, solid bottle. which would be their way of saying this is a serious product. I suspect that's all. That's all it is really. And we like plenty of glass in the glass centres, don't we?
So that's a 2016, and the Tempranillo is from Navarra,
Yeah.
and this one's a 2019, and this was a Sunday Times Wine Club one, and I think it was about $12.99. I don't know how much the other one was because it was a present.
Well, Ligia Bosco, I should think, would be in Argentine terms relatively expensive. I can't speak for Sunday Times Wine Club. Well, Navarra just down the river from Rioja, isn't it, actually?
As a conscientious glass seller, I noticed when we went to Argentina one or two things of interest, and one was exactly as described. The bottles were a little bit taller, and what you might call the dimple in the bottle at the bottom was more pronounced.
Yeah.
One other thing, incidentally, whilst we're talking about Argentina, we did notice the way in which they actually train their vines quite often is at 45 degrees to the sun. And it reminds you really of the old Victorian gardens where for vegetables and etc., where they took a little bit more of the sun and took advantage of it. Just a point of interest.
Well, I think the answer to that probably is it will presumably, and I've obviously been to Argentina too, and you know, the days are shorter, and therefore you've got to get every bit of sunshine you can. And interestingly, which everybody knows now, but in case anybody doesn't, the rainfall is almost nil, and therefore the vineyards in the most case are irrigated by meltwater from snow from the Andes. So you see in most of the vineyards, certainly in Mendoza, you see channeled water through to take advantage of the snow melt when it happens. It's a very beautiful, romantic sight, actually, isn't it?
Definitely.
And Martin, the punt in the base of the bottle, can you tell us what the sort of the history of why there is this big dimple?
You should find a good glass seller to tell me that, actually. I have no idea. Does he give strength to glass, possibly?
There's a whole combination of reasons why. I'm sorry, I was being very unfair in asking the question.
I presume that if you push something up, it would give strength to the structure. And if there were a fermentation or something, it wouldn't.
It's a multifold purpose. For, if there's any residue, shall we say, it would tend to go around the side, obviously, of the dimple. It's mechanically stronger, much stronger, and a waiter, and this is perhaps not necessarily complete, might be serving it like that.
Yeah.
There's some, excuse the expression, up the bum.
Master, we experienced that when we visited to Argentina. You're exactly right. Thank you.
See, mine doesn't have a dimple in the bottom. I haven't opened mine because if I open this, it'll still be open in about 6 months' time. Mine's Malbec's Caminada 2018. I like the label.
I suspect the reason really originally was because wines weren't that stable. They could easily have a secondary fermentation in bottle, and therefore, as Richard says, it would give added strength and blow out. Nowadays, that's firmly a thing of the past. You never, ever get that situation arising. Therefore, you don't need a puntal anymore. So it will be there for reasons of marketing to look nice, I suspect. But actually, I noticed on the cheaper wines from everywhere, the bottles are getting lighter and lighter, aren't they?
That's quite deliberate, yes.
Deliberate, yeah.
Yeah. The glass industry needs to ensure that its carbon footprint is progressively reduced.
Yes, and we need to not lug around, kilograms of material which we don't really need to bother with. In the wine trade, I mean.
Martin, it's Tricia again. Can I read you Wikipedia on the punt?
Go on then.
Historically, punts were a function of wine bottles being made by glass blowers. The seam was pushed up to make sure the bottle could stand upright and there wasn't a sharp point of glass on the bottom. It's also thought that the punt added to the bottle's structurally integrity. There you are.
Well, roughly what we were saying.
It's exactly what you said.
Yeah. Very interesting, Trish, actually.
As a past member of the Guild of Sommeliers, the other advantage of having the punt, as demonstrated in terms of pouring, would be that you can actually pour the glass of wine to somebody with it in a position so that the person receiving the wine could actually read the label and know what they were drinking, instead of holding the bottle fully and covering the label. So it's very useful with champagne, for instance. But certainly with wine that has got a punt, it makes it much easier to pour for somebody so that they can actually read the label as it's being poured.
With champagne, because of the process of producing champagne, the glass bottle is very much thicker to start off with than an ordinary wine bottle. And the punt does do just the significant thing of keeping the mechanical strength as high as possible. Because obviously if a bottle should have a second, well, it has multiple fermentations anyway, but you certainly don't want that to break prematurely on you.
No, quite.
Not with
Very
the way
dangerous.
not with the way they stack them in the cellars. It would be a multiple reaction if one started to go. Shall I go on? I got the Tempranillo, but I got it, it's a Spanish one, Prado Rey Tempranillo. That, I'm afraid, I don't know where it came from. It was a gift, found it in my cellar. I valued it at about £12 a bottle. And again, it is, in fact, I've often thought of Tempranillo being a bit on the lightish side, but this one is really quite pleasant and very, very drinkable and has a fair bit of body to it. It's lovely and rounded, not as heavy as the Malbec, and would be very nice with dinner. Slightly chilled, I would almost serve it as a sort of a sort of an aperitif almost in the summer. It doesn't need to be sort of too warm. It's really very drinkable indeed.
That's very interesting. I mean, I should have said, which I didn't, that or maybe I did, I don't remember now, that Tempranillo has become the universal red grape of Spain. I mean, it's grown all over Spain now. It started surely in Rioja, but now it's grown almost everywhere. And it's become Spain's signature variety. Perhaps I did say it, I don't remember.
Martin, is the Tempranillo grown down in Sicily?
Sicily?
Yeah.
Well, I would have said not, but I'm cautious these days because you suddenly find that everything's grown everywhere.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
The difference in the
I would doubt it.
Yeah.
It'd be nice fun to go and find out, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I'm just going to ask Google.
There are some very nice wines in Sicily.
I love
amazing
Sicilian wines.
Yeah, amazing.
Me too.
And the interesting thing when you look at wine lists, and it's one of the things that I often do, is if you go to a restaurant, and often than not, one sort of has tears in one's eyes when you see the price of some of the wines, particularly if they're sort of popular ones like Picpoul de Pinet, which you can pick up in France for sort of €4 or €6, and they suddenly pricing them on the restaurant wine list at £42. And you think, really, that's a bit over the top. But I then start looking at other countries and other areas, And Sicily and Portugal are areas I always try and see if they're listing, because invariably the prices are much more sensible and the wines are really, really good value and delicious.
The trouble
What I
with
suggest on the pick pool, that it's the shape of the bottle that possibly sells it. And the other thing, we've actually visited Sicily and gone very near Mount Etna, and the wines I think are influenced by the ash that must come out of the volcanic ash. Martin, what do you think of Brunel?
the soil, certainly. I mean, I don't know Sicilian wine particularly well. Like you, I've been there. Of course, I have. But they're gaining traction, aren't they? And they're getting better and better. And yes, I mean, there are indigenous grape varieties down there that give Sicilian wines a style all of their own, to be quite honest. But I think one shouldn't lose track of the fact that if you take a bottle of an inexpensive bottle of wine, you've got the cost of the transport, the cost of the label, the cork, the bottle, and marketing, you name it. The actual cost of the wine is almost insignificant. And as you go up the scale, of course, that proportion changes. But a lot of wine, you know, you say, oh, it only costs €2 or €3. By the time you get it back here and then everyone's made a markup on it, you're up for 8-10 quid.
And the UK tax is quite heavy on wine as well.
Oh, and
especially lower.
Of course, absolutely.
They charge the same amount of tax on the wine, which is a cheaper wine, as it would an expensive wine, which is ridiculous.
Shame on Chateau Lafite as it would be on Picpoul de Pinet, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, Martin, look, can I ask you to look into your crystal ball? Let's assume that we leave Europe without a deal. What's the impact on European-made wine, price-wise?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. It will depend on the British governments and what sort of tax they want to impose, presumably. I don't know. I mean, I would think the wine trade is pretty important. The UK is an enormous market for French wine. So I would suspect that everyone's going to bust themselves to make sure that as best they can. And the consumer, well, the consumer has a choice. I mean, 40 years ago, it would have been a disaster. Now, a consumer can shrug his or her shoulders and say, oh, I'll go to Chile or Argentina or India or anywhere else pretty well. So we'd all like to go on drinking French wines, at least most of us would. And at the higher level, the duty wouldn't matter much anyway. But I don't know the answer. It depends on what sort of deal is struck. I was
of course. But I was saying, if there wasn't a deal struck, are we going to have a more expensive duty or import duty than we currently have?
Well, yes.
I thought, as part of the wine trade, you might well have been aware.
Of course, and obviously wines like from Australia and Commonwealth countries will probably do a deal whereby they get preferential treatment, as they did before we joined the EU, of course.
Am I right in saying that something well in excess of 50% of Australian wine, New Zealand wine, sold in this country is bottled in this country now?
Is what? Oh yes, they're
bottled in this country.
Absolutely. And you look at the small print on the label and you'll see that. And that's a very interesting question, because it enables us to bring prices, keep prices low. And because of the skill in shipping containers now and the skill in bottling, there's almost no downside to UK bottling. When I joined the wine trade in 1962, you could rely upon UK bottlings being pretty average because, of course, they were oxidized and, you know, nobody couldn't control it. Nowadays, it's slick and quick, and there are huge installations that bottle container after container of wines from all over the world, and very well too. And you wouldn't know if you didn't see it on the label.
Often it doesn't actually mark it on the label, but it certainly does in the what's called the punt mark in the bottom of the bottle
Well, it'll be
for
there
those who can recognise the maker. And I'm looking at Matthew Demon because he used to work for probably the largest bottle manufacturer who also has a wine filling plant.
Is that right?
In a
That, indeed, the Quinn plant, as it was in my days, in Cirque now, fantastic plant with fantastic facilities for bottling and qualified wine people on site to ensure that the quality is exactly right.
I think it must be about 5 years ago. I had the pleasure of taking a group of glass sellers to that particular company, ENSA, just outside Chester. Because that happens to be the area where Matthew lives as well, I think that he managed to climb in on the trip without too much trouble.
It was a great trip.
Mind you, I've got an awful lot more in one glass than the other.
Now, I tell you a little story apropos of that. Back in about 1965, 68, there was a wine bottling firm in New Cross. And as a copper would, we used to pop in there night duty occasionally. And they'd be there with a lever because they ran 24 hours a day. And they said, "What are you doing today?" Which, "Oh, it's Beaujolais." "Oh, right." So they do that. Then you say, "What's next?" It's say, just for instance, a Malbec. "What's that? Red or white?" Is it red? "Oh, right." And you just pull the same lever, but a different bottle name. I can't remember the name of the firm now, but if it wasn't red, it was just whatever they had, and if it was white, it was another one. They only had two. But while I'm here, I went and got a wine of Chile, a Malbec, Estevez from our Aldi. It was under £5 a bottle. We've used a little bit in the cooking. We've tried it, and I haven't actually tried the drains with it yet. But we're not very keen on that one.
There might be a good reason.
Well, that's right. So I also got an Argentinian one. This was about just under £6 a bottle. Uco Valley, wine of Argentina. And I noticed, as Martin said, 1,050 meters in the up in the Uco Valley. That I'm finding isn't too bad. I'm finding them a bit too, I don't know, tanniny, but almost too strong is a word I'm going to use for that. So I much prefer the Tempranillo. Now, this is a 2019 from Rioco, Faustino Rivero, Uleccia. And this was about £7 a bottle, and that is very, very palatable. However, the best one.
How many have you got?
Enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Also, well, the best one.
I think you're being upstaged, Mr. Overy.
Well, we found it was this one. It's called Entre Luna, organic moon wine. Wow. Tempranillo 2018, Vino La Tierra de Castilla, single vineyard in Spain, Finca Constancia. Oh. And that has one hands down. That is a very, very pleasant Tempranillo. I usually poo-poo organics and things. I'm not too sure about the moon business.
You have to drop your trousers when they're picking.
The label is a white background with a sort of shadow graph of a hare standing on a cliff looking at the moon. So there we go.
Where did you get it from?
This one, I'm not sure whether that was Aldi or whether, no, I think this one was Sainsbury's, and that was £8 a bottle.
It's bottled in New Cross.
Not the one in New Cross, no. I'm trying to remember the name of the firm, but I can't for the life.
Is that a Tempranillo?
That's a Tempranillo, yes.
Yeah.
2018.
Picking up on the hair, and this is a question for Martin. Sorry, I always throw these difficult questions at you, but the other name for the Tempranillo, as you probably know, is, pardon my Spanish, is Ul de Lebre, which is eye of the hare, which is why you've got a hare on your bottle. Any idea why Tempranillo in Catalan is called Eye of the Hare?
Right, I don't. And one of the fascinating things about grapes actually is very often they do have different names, usually actually in different countries, to be quite honest. And it can be very, very confusing. You think you're buying something completely different, and it is in fact the same thing. No, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of synonyms for Tempranillo, but I need to look that up. I just know it as Tempranillo, and it appears elsewhere.
I saw, I must admit, I only just saw it this evening, looking in one of my wine books, and it seemed a very odd one. Eye of the hare, hair of the dog we know about, but eye of the hare is.
I've got several books too, dedicated totally to grape varieties, and honestly, you are so right. There's so many different names for the same thing. But going back to the was it biodynamic or whatever? I mean, that's a science all of its own, really, and it's a very interesting one too. Really, you've got organic and you've got biodynamic, and now you've got sustainability comes into there are all sorts of things which growers are doing to persuade the public that they are, and quite rightly so, working with the environment rather than against it, which is good, of course.
So coming back to kind of talking about lovely taste, even though I'm not tasting this one, I would say Malbec I've always enjoyed when I've been at a glass artist's house, Ronald Pennell, drinking it out of his glasses with his engravings wrapped around the glass, and a lovely lead crystal glass. And I think that's my memory of drinking Malbec.
Well, that's lovely.
Kind of quite full. I know that I have to, usually I've drunk it when I know that I don't have to drive back anywhere. But I would say the best way I've had it served is in Ronald Pennell's lead glasses with his engravings wrapped around in this little set and decanted for a lunch. And every time you go, it'll be a Malbec that's served you. So, and this is where this came from. So I didn't pay for this, so I don't know what it was, but I know he often gets Malbec by the crate. So.
Well, I love that. I think we should perhaps have another tasting with the same wine in a different glass, actually. And it does make a difference, doesn't it, really? I'm fascinated by that. I've always talked about, sorry, it's my cuckoo clock. I've always talked about what I call the theatre of wine. And obviously the wine must always be good. It must have integrity and qualities about it. To an extent, when we were selling wine, and indeed when you drink a bottle of wine, you're selling dreams and drinking dreams, and you're selling a wine from a local space with all the romance that engenders. And I think it's a bit fanciful, I do grant you, but it does make a bit of a difference, the story behind it, where it comes, the family that made it, and the left-hand side of the hill, and all the rest of it. And I think the glass you drink it out of.
Well, that's where the Riedel family made their fortune, by having half a dozen, or is it a dozen different glasses, one for each different grape variety.
Yeah, they do. I think it's a bit overdone myself, personally speaking.
But we had a wine tasting with the Riedel UK sales director year before last, I think it must have been. And he provided the wines and the glasses, and he got us to pour the wine from one glass to another and then back again and drink it out of both. And there really was a significant difference in flavour.
Yeah, that's the aeration, isn't it? It's the oxidation.
Well, yes, but it was more than that, because we'd only poured half into the next glass. There was significant, very noticeable differences. Anybody else go to that wine tasting?
Yes.
Obviously, you're not real boozers then, are you? Just playing at it.
But a comment on glasses, Richard, that we're drinking out of some 1970s Dartington glasses, and as you can see, they've got a tulip shape rather than the more traditional rounded shape to a red wine glass. And I have to say, it's not, you know, it doesn't improve the experience having this kind of glass.
No.
So I'm with you that glasses do make a difference.
Well, this is a Riedel. I forget which red wine this was intended for. I'm afraid I've only got 3 or 4 different shapes from Riedel because they're so bloody expensive.
Master, we're enjoying a Malbec here, drinking from the glass that was a gift at the Master's banquet of Vivian Bendel in 2012. And we poured it in at about 5:30 this evening, and it's gorgeous and it tastes very nice indeed, and we're thoroughly enjoying it. We asked our daughter to look for a wine for us, and she found this Malbec at $5.99, and it's lovely. We're thoroughly enjoying it. She got it from a small local store. Well, it wasn't so much small, it was little.
little.
Yeah, he doesn't improve.
And Martin, how is it that Lidl is consistently now getting awards for their wine, and yet it is so much cheaper than outlets?
It's a great shop in Lidl, but I do know a little bit about it. I think what they have done, what they do. I mean, I find going to Lidl a very dispiriting experience. Everything's chucked all over the place and doesn't give you much satisfaction. What they do in terms of wine, they buy one parcel. They walk into a place and they say they'll buy, I don't know how many cases, a massive quantity. They get a cracking good price. They take it out, dump it in their stores. They advertise it on Friday nights on the telly or wherever it might be. By Saturday lunchtime, it's gone. That's it. So you wouldn't, like going back to buy Trevento from Tesco next week, you wouldn't get it. So they buy block parcels. It's a sort of buy it big and sell it cheap philosophy of the sort of barrow wine.
You mean like Tesco?
Well, I mean, Tesco.
Like Tesco used to be.
I don't like
exactly. Stack it high.
I don't think they do like Tesco. I think Lidl does this thing where they have a bargain, they have an offer every week, and they've got followers who are looking for the deal that they're going to bring out every week or every month. So, you know, it's a bit like you can buy a paddleboard in the summer from Lidl for £200, and so it was out, people queuing out the door.
Yeah.
To get it, because it was just the right season and the right weather. So I think they match their wines and their seasons and the weather, and they accordingly, you know. So getting close to Christmas, it'll start to be the sparkling wines, and the you know. And
if you get it right. I mean, I'm not here to support anybody in particular. Only Davies, who I sort of semi-work for, who are very good, incidentally.
Yeah.
But I mean, Lidl have a lot to offer. But if you hit it right, but you can go the following week and buy something that's they look cheap, but that's it all.
Yeah, Chilean Malbec, for instance.
No, it's reminding me of the old booze cruises, you know, from Portsmouth across to Calais, and used to go into the French supermarket and sort of see something for, you know, ridiculous, for a couple of francs, and then come back, and sometimes it could be good, and somebody be very good at selecting, and the other time you'd get something that you kind of couldn't even put into a casserole.
We've all done that. You buy a bottle, go to your car, open it, taste it, and then you nip back and buy a case.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Why do you have to leave the supermarket?
I think it really epitomizes the sort of restaurant customer who, when putting wine lists together, you have 2 or 3 types of customer. You have the one that will drink on the left-hand side of the page and will go with the name or the maker or the shipper, and they know their way around a wine list. There's the other one who will look at the price and will be dictated to by the price, which I think is what happens a lot with supermarkets. And then there's the other customer who has a pin and takes a stab at it with a regard to an adventure. And I think that's the most sort of unpredictable type of client you have in the restaurant industry, is the one that has a sense of adventure and is prepared to go and have a look at something that is a little bit off the wall, a little bit different, and it's not always dictated by price. And of course, as Martin will know, or would have told us, there's, you know, if you're looking at French wines, you really need to know who the makers are and who's doing it. When you start traveling around the world, you really are sort of stabbing at any number of wines. And I think the thing is that Aldi and Lidl seem to have got their buying into such a way that they are now commanding a huge customer base, because an awful lot of people for everyday drinking are buying on the merit of price.
There was a Radio 4 programme a couple of months ago saying the UK, there's increased sales of Malbec recently because it's become the more affordable wine. So people have been looking for different, slightly different wines, but they've been actually, because their price point has changed slightly. So there's been an uptake in Malbec sales recently in the UK market.
So as I say earlier on, Malbec reflects Bordeaux, doesn't it? So what by buying Malbec, you've got something of the authority of a decent Bordeaux at a low unit cost, actually. So that I can completely understand.
It was an interesting
going back to restaurants. That's a beef I have with somebody who's been in the wine trade for 60 years. I find restaurant markups are absolutely obscene.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Frankly, I'm damned if I'm paying anything above the one from the bottom, because the prices are absolutely ridiculous. And they subsidize everything else on the cost of the wine. And I think it's a great shame. Those few restaurants who have a much better pricing policy and just add a set fee to all wines, therefore the more you pay, the better value you get, I think deserve support. That's a beef wine, sorry.
What do you think of my principle? If I go to a restaurant, I almost always go for the house wine, because they are putting their name on that, and I assume they would know or want it to be a good wine to reflect their taste. Do you think that's a good idea, or possibly I'm just being optimistic?
Yes, it's true.
In France, you judge a restaurant on what its house wine is like. If the chef there and the owner of the establishment gives a good house wine, it means he knows what he's doing. If it's a bad house wine, it's not worthwhile going to.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yes. I do that.
Be very careful if you go into a French restaurant, as I did once, and asked the sommelier for what was their house wine. He said, "What do you mean by house wine? That wine we put in the kitchen, we use for cooking?" And he absolutely squashed me, and I felt almost like leaving. I thought, what
Yeah.
a jumped up bit of.
I have to say, William, any wine waiter who tells you that they use their cheap wine for cooking, I would be very sceptical on what the standard of the food was.
Right.
Well, I
In
would say,
France, the house wine is called the cuvée du patron.
Yeah,
it means the patron's choice. So if his choice is bad, it's a bad patron.
when you were saying about the markup as well, that's why I quite like going for a curry, because you can take your own wine.
I'm all for
BYO isn't a bad idea.
like curries, but I'm all for taking my own wine.
Yeah.
And actually, around here where I live in Suffolk, there are not many good restaurants. That one or two, and you can take your own wine. They charge you corkage, but it's still cheaper than buying the, than buying the same thing.
Yeah, that's something that I think is important, Martin, that if you do have a restaurant that what will let you take your own wine, then even if you're paying 10 or 15 pounds for corkage, the value of the cost that you are actually buying of the wine you're taking probably added together is cheaper than a reasonably drinkable wine on their wine list.
Absolutely. No question.
Yes, do you get charged for screwage nowadays, Martin?
I've not heard that one, Vincent. That's brilliant.
Can I tell you about the wine we have? Which
yeah.
Can you see?
Yeah.
I got off the shelf at Waitrose this afternoon.
Yeah.
Fusione, Argentinian Malbec. It doesn't actually say the altitude, I'm afraid, but it is very, very pleasant. And Joe and I are growing, or it is growing on us, the more we drink. It's very, very pleasant. I think it was 10.49, and I do recommend it. Fusione, and this is a special reserve. It's absolutely.
Is that a Malbec or a Tempranillo?
That's a Malbec.
It's a Malbec. Malbec. Sorry. We can only drink one bottle a night. We can't
Oh,
drink two
no.
bottles.
Oh, dear.
We opted for the Malbec. Sorry to be a pair of wimps.
Very sensible.
Like you.
Hello, hi, it's Nick Gray speaking here. Just supporting Vincent from that perspective. We also had a trip to Waitrose, and we went for the Catena Malbec, which $9.99, very good wine, high altitude, very smooth tasting. There we go. What would you say about its tasting?
Well, I must snap.
Actually, there is no Waitrose in your area, so you obviously bought that from Aldi.
I must first of all just qualify my comments by saying I'm not really a red wine drinker, and you're obviously all very knowledgeable. So I'm just going to qualify my comments before I make.
Don't worry, we just drink.
I need more practice, Sarah Jo.
I'm actually really enjoying this Malbec. I would say it's got a very gentle, quite a smooth taste. It's not too harsh. I don't particularly like red wines that have got a lot of tannin, and they're sort of, I sort of like a smoother red wine if I'm going to drink a red wine. And I think this actually fits the bill perfectly, and I've been sipping away on this quite happily. So I would recommend this one. I think it's got a really nice, gentle taste to it. A little bit of vanilla, I'd say, and just very, very nice wine, very drinkable.
Yeah, but Catena is also very good for their Chardonnay as well. If you do like a Chardonnay, that's different evening, but Catena Chardonnay is very good. But the other wine we went for, which is totally different, is an Australian Tempranillo. Because I mean, I love the Rioja, but I thought I'd like to try something different. But this is from Waitrose. It's called Hither Yon, and young wine, but 2018 from Southern Hemisphere, very nice. McLaren Vale, so very close to the coast, but sort of on the hills there. That's really, really very nice. We poured both wines out sort of about 5 o'clock this evening, and they were both very similar in colour. You know, quite young wines, but you could drink from
2018.
you could drink them both straight away, and they were immediately very palatable. You know, I think sometimes you drink red wine, and it's, you know, some wines need more time to breathe, and I think with both these wines, you were able to taste it and enjoy it straight away. So that was wonderful.
I think for me, though, I think the Tempranillo's it's got a much stronger flavour. You know, you sort of stick your nose in it, and it's the
fruit flavour.
The fruit sort of hits you. It's much
different, isn't it? It's got a different flavour, hasn't it?
Yeah, different flavour. So I would say for me, I think the Malbec for me is a little bit easier drinking, but the Tempranillo is
well, I think you both have said exactly what the growers would like you to say. That's exactly what they're aiming to do: produce wines that are accessible, have got essential quality and style and integrity, is the term I keep using, but are instantly available and enjoyable by almost everybody, whether they're experiencing wines or not. That's exactly what Malbec is doing, which it didn't really do much in France, but it's beginning to doing heavily in other parts of the world. And actually, I'm not here to sing a song for Waitrose either, but if you want a bit cut above, Waitrose quality is usually pretty good. And Luigi Bosca, Barbara, that comes from Waitrose, I think, doesn't it? They certainly sell it anyway.
Yeah.
Martin, you just mentioned Waitrose. We bought this Malbec. It's the most gorgeous name, beefsteak, and it's got so much fruit in it. And it's less than £10 a bottle. I can't remember exactly, but it'll be really good with what it says, beefsteak or something that's a good, you know, needs something to accompany it. It's really nice.
That's for Malbec, is it, David?
Yes, beefsteak, Malbec, absolutely, that's right.
Yeah. But it's what it means, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I went for the name, I have to say.
I brought a Malbec from Waitrose again, which is from Carcassonne, it's called Malbec de Balthazar. Actually, it's quite nice. It's 2019, the same as was being, I think Robin mentioned, and it's quite good.
Mm.
A very reasonable price. I think it was £6.99, that one.
You beat me on that.
My Tempranillo was like Martin's. It was a Crianza, 100% Tempranillo, so it said. And I thought that was extremely nice. That came as well. That was £12.99. 2017.
Certainly wines from the south of France, Carcassonne. I used to buy a lot of wine down there at one time. And the fantastic, this was the area of the famous wine lake. Do you all remember that 20 years ago?
Yes.
And that's all gone. It's been replaced by some seriously good wine, which will rival anything from Australia or anywhere else in the world, as a matter of fact. And I was often asked, in the old days anyway, when New World wines were coming on stream, are the French fighting back? But in a sense, they didn't need to fight back, but they did need to rethink a bit, I must say. And that's where what they're doing, producing low unit cost wines of high quality, which after all are only 400 or 500 miles from our front doors, aren't they?
Mm.
Well, 1,000 miles anyway.
What was Ron and Caroline drinking?
Sorry. I've just considered that Caroline has pushed aside Malbec. Everybody's been talking about how nice the Malbec is. This is actually quite a nice Malbec. Sunday Times Wine Club again. It's called Opie. and it's one of their best-selling Malbecs. And it was about £9 a bottle, and she much preferred the Rioja, which is a Gran Reserva 2009.
Yeah.
It's the last bottle I have of a case, and it's very, very good indeed. Martinez Buchanda. Do you know them, Martin?
I mean, I don't, but there's so many different growers, you know, and we just don't know them all. But how much was the Grand Reserva?
Round about £17.
Okay, well, it's a significant step up, isn't it, in terms of price? So, but it should be good. I'm delighted. I mean, those wines are lovely. I think I love Rioja, and I think Grand Reserva is tip top. But what I love about this evening is that so many people have come in with really enjoyable wines, and you've been saying £8, £9, £10 a bottle. That's a sensible price to pay, I think.
Well, I went to Aldi to buy.
It's probably been relatively expensive, if you see what I mean. When you're down at £5, I mean, gee whiz, there's not much left for the wine, is there? At that price.
I went to Aldi to buy my wine for tonight, and I bought a Rioja Grand Reserve 2012 from Aldi, and it was £6.50. It's an exceptionally good wine as well, which amazing. You were talking about Little and Aldi earlier on. They seem to do some incredible deals on wine.
And with all that wire on the bottle, that makes it much more valuable too.
Go fast strikes.
Gold wire.
Can I chip in with my wines yet?
Yes, please do.
As I quaff my delicious Sorkova Pinot Noir from Romania, Waitrose, £9 or something. Because I was having an Asda delivery, I ordered a Rioja and a Malbec from Asda the other day. And here I have a Californian Malbec, non-vintage, barefoot it's called, bottled in Uxbridge, received in 2017 a double gold at Jerry R. Mead's New World International Wine Competition. And it costs $5.75, and it's probably dreadful. It's described as a luscious red wine with juicy flavors of blackberry, currant, and vanilla with a smooth finish. I wait to discover that. My other one is a called Campo Viejo Rioja, Tempranillo Rioja. And it was reduced to £6. It's 2018 vintage. It won a bronze vintage. It won the 2013 vintage, won a bronze medal at the International Wine and Spirit Competition. And 2015, the Decanter World Wine Awards in 2015. Been around for a long time. A cherry red Rioja with intense rich flavors of ripe red cherries and strawberries, followed by sweet vanilla and spice. And amongst other things, it was the first Campo Viejo has the first winery, it was the first winery in Spain to achieve carbon neutral status in 2012. I will report on the taste of that later.
Very good.
Help me, but I mean, that sort of price, as you say, there's not much left for the wine, but you know, maybe they're all right. We'll see.
We drink that all the time. It's a
little
very good
story.
wine.
Sorry?
It's a very good wine. We drink it all the time.
Oh, do you?
Yes, it is. Very good.
Good. Well, I look
excellent
forward to
value for money.
Yeah, yeah.
Campo Viejo is a... Sorry.
I was just going to say two little stories about exploding bottles. Some years ago, Bema and I were in Romania and we were invited fishing by the Chief of Staff of the Romanian Armed Forces, and all the attachés went, and we had a grand feast afterwards with carp soup with carp heads in, and the unfortunate Romanian word for a carp is crap. And we were served from some wine from the army's vineyards, and I happened to be sitting next to the Chief of the General Staff, and I complimented him on his wine, and he very kindly had sent round to us several large bottles a day or so later. And it so happened that we were going off to London for some reason. When we came back, all the bottles had exploded, causing considerable damage to the surrounding area. Another very quick story is the Girdlers Hall was burnt down in the war, and the Beadle, they have a very fine wine cellar. The Beadle, when the flames had died down, went down and saw the wine cellar wasn't terribly damaged. We thought, oh God, there are all the bottles of wine. When he looked closely, they'd all blown their corks because of the heat.
Oh.
So enough from me.
Oh.
Anybody else have a chance?
I think we've run over half an hour longer than usual.
Yes.
I think it's been an interesting adventure. Perhaps, Martin, I could ask you to sort of wind the evening up.
Very good. Well, I think I've probably said too much anyway. I just think it's been an absolutely lovely evening, and I love people not just reading off the back of the label, that's all very valuable too, but having tasted wines and given your view of them. And actually, I've learned an awful lot about all sorts of things. And I think to me, it does say that Tempranillo is a very popular wine in the sense that when it makes Rioja particularly, but also elsewhere. And Malbec has recovered itself from its lost ground in Bordeaux and is thriving on the other side of the world. And I think we've proved that tonight conclusively. So I think it's been lovely.
Martin,
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul.
Particularly great thanks to Martin, who's brought us all together.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful, great fun, really great fun. And if we haven't learnt something from Martin tonight, we're either too big-headed in the first instance to think that we knew it already, or like the rest of us will find that we shall go off to choose our wines very carefully from either Malbec or Tempranillo or Rioja. I have to say both grapes are particular favourites of mine, and I was just sorry I felt I couldn't drink 2 whole bottles tonight.
Oh,
shame. But unlike you, Ray, we don't have a half-drunk bottle in the house. We can't.
Yeah, never say.
Oh, touche.
Master, could I just say that, in fact, thank you for your nice words about me, but actually, you know, our clerk, Paul Wenham, set all this up. He was the life force behind it. He set the agenda. So I think full marks to him for getting this show.
You're very kind, but really, Martin, I mean, your wisdom is always much appreciated, and your knowledge of wine leading it all, I think, has culminated in everybody learning something. I had a lot of emails after our last Taste of the Grape episode, and I'm sure tonight everybody's learned a little bit more and a different avenue to look at how they buy their wine. We probably won't do another one now until January.
Shame.
December is going to be rather busy. We don't have a gathering next week. The following week is quite busy. We have our own pantomime on the 7th of December, which is an evening of entertainment and frivolity.
Oh, no, we don't.
Planning. Oh, yes, we do.
Oh, yes, we do.
And it's, by the way, it's behind you. And then on the Tuesday, of course, we've got the City Carol concert. organised by one of our own liverymen who's master of the information technologists at the moment. We also have court meeting that week. And it looks as though we may well be able to do the installation on the 15th for the chosen members of the company that are going to take office for next year. But I've yet to discuss that with St James Garlic Hythe. So on that note, everybody, I would wish you a very good evening. Enjoy the rest of your
Can
evening.
I just say, here is the secret to those half-drunk bottles.
And I wish you all stay safe and healthy.
Before we go, Paul,
Thanks, Paul. Yes.
we wish Vanessa a happy birthday for yesterday.
Oh, indeed.
Happy birthday, Vanessa.
Yeah. Cheers, Vanessa.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, everybody. See you all.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paul.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.